Okay, so what I'd like to do here is to share my thoughts on three modern four-wheel drive buggies: the Kyosho Lazer ZX6, the Team Losi 22.4, and the Team Associated B44. I will not guarantee that this is a comprehensive comparison because there are surely things that I will miss. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head here. But I have had these buggies for a little while. I've had the B44 for like 4 years. I've had this for a little over a year. I've had this for a couple of months now. And basically, one of the questions I get regarding the Lazer, for example, is whether it is worth the money. Because this is almost twice as much money as either of these two. This goes for, I think, about $570 or $580 for the non-discounted retail price. 22.4 is somewhere around $320 or so, I think, if I remember correctly. And the B44 you can get in the mid 300s. This is the B44.0, I should point out. It's not the 0.1, the 2, or the 3. This is the original 0.0. But the platform is basically the same throughout the series. So I will use this as a representative B44 to describe my thoughts on it. So starting with the Lazer, again, the question is it really worth the money? The honest answer I have to give is it depends. Among the three of them, the one that is straight out of the box, the easiest to drive consistently fast with is the Losi 22.4. At least on the tracks that I race at. You can just build it, use the stock setup, and be very quick with it. Granted, over time, you will want to make some modifications. Like, for example, I have the front and rear sway bar kit that I have installed. And I think that's the only aftermarket part that I put on. Actually, no, that and the MIP CVDs. You put those on and you're fine. And the car can be very competitive. You just have to know how to set up a car. And I just got back from a race with this car today, and I was playing around, during each qualifying round with different setup ideas, different tires and things. And I zeroed in on a setup which, on the surface I was racing on, was just completely dialed in, and this car was amazing. The only problem is the belts. These have 2mm pitch center and front belts, and the front belt in particular tends to snap. You will know that it's on its way out when under hard braking the belt will start to skip. You'll hear it skip. And what I usually do there is, once I hear that, I start to back off on the braking endpoint to try to preserve the belt a little bit. This will happen especially on high grip tracks. You can, of course, loosen the slipper clutch a little bit to preserve the belt as well. But if you loosen this too much to save the belt, you're also going to lose power transfer from the motor through the drivetrain. So you won't have as much punch coming out of corners. So there's only so much you can do with the slipper to save the belt. The other thing you can do to save the belt is to run the front clicker unit. I actually run the clicker completely locked, so it's just full-time four-wheel drive. But if you run some clicker, then under hard braking, the front wheels can freewheel, and that won't lock up the drivetrain and force the belt to skip. So that's an advantage of using a clicker or a one-way. The problem is that makes the car very aggressive on turn-in under braking, because it brakes like a two-wheel drive car. Okay, so I run it locked, and I just kind of pay the price of having the belts snap every once in a while. And you just have to go in and do the surgery to replace the belts. Replacing the belts is a lot of surgery. The front belt is not too bad, but to get to the center belt, and especially the rear belt, is a pain in the butt. The rear belt's fine, though. That's a 3mm pitch belt. That will last a very long time. But these two center belts, in particular the front belt, is a big problem. So you'll find yourself having to replace the pulley on this front lace shaft here on this side that drives the front belt, as well as the pulley that connects to the slipper clutch that drives the center belt there. Those do tend to wear out. The other problems with the 22.4 are the wheel axles. With the stock 22.4 that comes with universal joints, the wheel axles tend to snap if you land a jump maybe a little bit sideways. I have on multiple occasions snapped wheel axles doing that, which is unfortunate. So that's why I got the MIP CVDs. They're much stronger. They can still bend if you're really, bad with them, but they're considerably stronger than the stock units. But that's more or less it with this car. You don't have to buy anything else to make it run, fast or to make it durable or anything. Just the CVDs, the front rear sway bar kit doesn't make it more durable. It just allows you more tuning options. And that's it. You can use the plastic steering rack. You can use, the stock front hinge pin mount. I think I've said this multiple times in my other 22.4 videos. All the plastic parts that people tend to replace with aluminum parts, they're spending a lot of money on stuff that they really don't need to spend money on. And all it really does is transfer stresses to other parts of the car that are more expensive, and they're more likely to break as a result. Just run everything as plastic as you can straight out of the box, get the CVDs, and you're all set. But you do have to watch out for especially the front belt. I do not know of a good fix to this. I recently bought the front gearbox upgrade. It's like a whole new front gearbox that runs the front belt tension a little bit tighter. That makes it less likely to skip. But the problem is, because it puts more tension on the belt, it makes it more likely to snap. So you still run into belt problems with the longer front gearbox. Okay, so it's still a problem. If it were not for that, I would probably vote the 22.4 among all of these as my favorite buggy. It's really, really good buggy, really good to drive. But you got to watch out for the belts. The Lazer, in my view, is everything that the B44 should have been. I mean, if you look at the actual layout, they're both shaft drive. The spur gear is roughly in the center of the chassis. You have a lot of motor and battery layout options on the Lazer. B44, at least the 0.0 doesn't really give you that. I think on the 0.3 you have a few options. But in terms of parts quality, this Kyosho BC Associated hands down. Of course, there are things you can do to the B44 to make it a little bit better. For example, you can get the J-Concept steering rack. You can get the RPM front arms, which are a godsend. This helps tremendously with durability. The rear, you're not going to break much in the rear. I do run the RPM rear hub carriers, or I don't know if they're RPM or maybe just the associated plastic units. I don't like running the aluminum hub carriers because they get stuck on the hinge pins, and if you have to replace a bearing, it's a real operation to just yank the hinge pin out and replace the wheel bearing. So just run the plastic unit and you hub carrier and you'll be fine. The other thing that the Lazer has that the B44 doesn't have is a good design for the front suspension. On the B44, the drive shafts are a little too short, I would say. The dog bones are not quite long enough so that you can have, say, a lot of front droop. If there's a particular track surface or track design where you need more front droop to have good landing performance, the B44 does not offer you that. And there's a lot of dog bone plunge, so if you magically had a longer drive shaft, it would actually hit the inside of the diff as the suspension compresses. So really what they need is a longer diff outdrive, which, as I understand it, the B44.3 does have. The gear diffs, the outdrives and the gears, I think, are a little bit longer than on the standard ball diffs. So you do get a little bit more of front droop sort of tuning option there on the B44, but still the Lazer is sort of light years beyond that. I mean, the amount of, let's see if I can get this right here, the amount of extra space you have there for the dog bone, I can go way more, I can put way more droop on this and still have the dog bone sort of captured within the diff outdrive, okay? And that's full droop with the present setup on the Lazer. And on the B44, it's not quite as much droop. Maybe it's close, but notice where the dog bone is. It's right at the outer edge of the diff outdrive, okay? So if you land a jump, if there's a flat landing to a jump, especially a big jump, the front of this is going to hit the ground, it's going to bounce, you have to wait for the car to settle, and then you can get going again. On the Lazer and on the 22.4, you don't have that problem. Now, with the B44, you can of course put thicker oil, stiffer springs up front to keep the front from bottoming out, but then you end up compromising more on the handling performance of the car. When you have more front droop, you have a larger total design space to play around with oil and springs and dampers and droop to get the right jumping and landing and handling performance. So the Lazer and the 22.4 are considerably better than the B44 as far as front droop is concerned. Okay. And again, the parts quality on the Lazer is really good. I mean, the diffs are very smooth when you put them together, and even after several runs, they still feel smooth. On the B44, they also use ball diffs, but for some reason, they get crunchy much quicker than on the Lazer. I run a 6.5 motor in both, so it's not like I'm putting any less power through the Lazer than I am through the B44. I actually have a 6.5 in all of these cars. I run them very fast. And the Lazer, the drivetrain has, dealt with that power just fine. B44, whenever I rebuild the diffs, they're fine for maybe a day, and then they start getting crunchy. So this car, straight out of the box, it's fine. It will be fast, but you will find yourself having to rebuild things more frequently and sooner than with either of the Lazer or the 22.4. Okay, it's still a fast car, but the lack of front droop really is a pain for me personally. And it uses sort of B4 platform type parts quality. So the arms, the plastics, the gearboxes, the tolerances on the gearbox. That's another big problem with the B44. You have to shim the diff just right to get just the right mesh, because the B44 gearboxes, the molded gearboxes, are it's just a lower quality mold, and so there's not as much, the tolerances are not as tight as what you would get on, say, the Lazer, for example. So you buy one brand new gearbox, you put brand new diffs together, you put them in, and within a day, I've seen friends of mine with their own B44s completely just grind out their gears because they weren't shimmed correctly, even though they shim them based on the manual, the settings in the actual instruction manual. Because there's poor tolerance, you actually have to know how to shim the diff gears in this gearbox. Each time you replace the gearbox, you have to recheck it, okay? So the parts quality is an issue on this. On the Lazer, it's you just set it and forget it. The instruction manual is not as good as the Associated. It does take more time to work through the build, but the drivetrain is solid. The diffs go together great. They're smooth. They last. They give you really good bearings. I think they give you like Teflon sealed bearings all through the chassis, with a few small exceptions, like I think the steering rack bearings are just conventional bearings. But everywhere else, the sealed bearings are all Teflon sealed. The shocks are great. The shocks for the Lazer are probably better than for the Losi or the Associated. I've found the Associated big bore shocks, I have these on several cars, they do tend to leak after a while. I haven't had that problem with the Losi shocks or the Kyosho shocks, but the Kyosho shocks tend to stay the smoothest among all of these. So there's a lot of little details about the Lazer that really make it stand out. The really good shocks, the good diffs, the high quality bearings, the parts quality, the tolerances, they're all better than on the B44. And that's why I say it is everything the B44 should have been. If I had to give it a few faults, I would say that the B44 does have more space to mount your electronics. The Lazer is a little bit tighter. So I think because the chassis is a bit narrower, but modern electronics are, not that big. So if you have like a Reedy black box and an Airtronics receiver, you'll be fine with any layout. I run a Spectrum receiver, which are bigger and clunkier. And sometimes I like to use Novak speed controls, which are also bigger and clunkier than something like a Reedy black box or an Orion R10 Pro. So that does limit my layout options. So I have to run the shorty layout here, which is fine. I mean, it works great, but it does limit my options. It also only comes with steel turnbuckles. Despite the parts quality you get throughout the rest of the kit, you get steel turnbuckles. The B44 comes with titanium turnbuckles, which is, you think that's not a big deal, and it usually isn't. I think the Losi turnbuckles are, I can't tell if they're steel or titanium, they might be steel. But, if you're going to spend huge money on a kit, just give me some titanium turnbuckles. I mean, how much, more can that actually be? So far, they've been fine. I have broken, I think, one of the steering turnbuckles, and so I had a backup set of Lunsford titanium turnbuckles, so I just installed them here. But again, back to the question, is this car really worth it? It's almost $600. If you can get it on sale, you can get it for maybe the low 500s, which is what I got mine for. Depends on what you want. For me, it's worth it because I think it's a great car to drive. Once you put the time into setting it up correctly, out of the box, the setup is not so great. You really got to spend some time with it. But once it's set up correctly, it's a great car to drive. You don't really have to worry about anything. You can be much harder on the brakes on this car than with the Losi because this doesn't have belts that you're going to snap. So, all those things make you not have to worry about this car. You can just run it, throw it on the shelf, bring it back out the next weekend, and run it again. You don't have to check anything. You don't have to check for screws going loose like they constantly do on the B44. You don't have to check for, belts like on the 22.4. The only way to inspect the front belt on this is to tear the gearbox apart. It's a huge operation. So all those little things, I think, for me, they add up for the Lazer, which for me personally make the Lazer worth the money. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a faster buggy than either of these two. Again, for the money, the 22.4 is your best bet. But if you want an all-around solid performer that is low maintenance, then the Kyosho's, in my view, it's definitely the way to go. You do have to watch out for the cost of parts. The suspension arms, the hub carriers, that kind of stuff, it's not too expensive. But if you have to replace, say, the chassis, for example, because the chassis does grind, it will grind down eventually. That's expensive. The shocks are expensive, but of course, that comes with kit. The biggest high-cost part is probably going to be the front universals. And this is, if anything, I would say this is the weakest part of this chassis. The front dog bones, as part of the CVAs, I found that these tend to bend more easily than the Losi CVDs, either the MIP parts or the original universals, or the standard associated steel CVAs. These are fairly durable. They don't bend quite as easily as the Kyosho parts. So these front universals, if you want to buy a new pair, it can run you anywhere from $30 to $50, depending on where you get them from. The associated parts are in the mid-20s, I think. The Losi CVDs are in the low 30s. So these are the most expensive among the CVAs. So that's something to watch out for. I try to preserve these for as long as I can. So if I find that it's, as I rotate the wheel and I look for where the bends are in the dog bone, if I see that it's bent, then I just get some pliers out and I try to bend it back and straighten it out as much as I can so that I'm not spending money on new CVAs. Because you, as far as I can find, you cannot actually buy individual dog bones for the CVAs. If you could buy just the dog bone, that might be maybe 10 or 15 bucks. The whole CVA unit as a pair is, quite a lot more than that. So it would be nice if they sold individual dog bones. That would make this a much clearer choice. So I guess those are my views so far. Parts quality, meh. Belts, meh. Front dog bones, they're okay. But this is more expensive. But for me, it's worth it. Again, there's less to worry about. Really fast buggy if you spend the time to set it up. Out of the box, setup's not so great. You really got to spend time with it. These two are okay. This one's probably the best right out of the box. So those are my thoughts. I really wish that, in closing, that Team Associated would make a solid four-wheel drive chassis. They've been running the B44 for several years, about 10 years or so, and it's been very successful. And to their credit, they have really good drivers on their team, and they've gotten results with this car. But it's just strange to me that these other chassis from the other major manufacturers are just so much better as a driving car, as a race car. And Team Associated hasn't really put enough effort, I don't think, into designing a solid four-wheel drive platform. So I do hope that the B55, or whatever it's going to be called when it comes out, their new four-wheel buggy, is a market improvement over the B44, which is already a great chassis, but these are better in my view. Okay, so that's it. I hope you have found this informative on my views so far of the Lazer 22.4 and the B44. If you have any questions or comments, please post them. I'm always open to hearing new things from you guys. And thanks for watching.